you just gave a TEDx talk that was both inspiring and heartbreaking at the same time. And before we dive into what the talk was about, I know we're going to spend a lot of time there. I would love to hear a little bit about what the journey was like to get to that TEDx stage, because I know that's something that so many people, myself included, want to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, the journey really started in 2020 when I went through the death of my mother, and I went through a lot of grief and just feeling really lost. Um, but I also found that if I thought of things to be grateful for and I tried to find the positive things, that it helped me move through that. And so what ended up happening in a nutshell was that I met Stacey Lauren and I did her Find Your Voice challenge, and I really did find my voice, right? And I had this idea that for hidden gifts, I wanted to, and I am still working on a memoir about the whole experience, but I had this idea for hidden gifts, and the more I talked about it, it started to sort of take on a life of its own within the various communities. And I created a group called Hidden Gifts of Loss, and then it it started to be like I started getting asked to share, to speak about it. And when I did, it was really well received. And I mean, I wasn't speaking in like arenas or anything, but just, basically on Facebook and with friends and everything. And I basically, Stacy kind of nominated me. Well, I went to San Diego for her TEDx, and then she basically nominated me to do a talk, which I felt like really opened the door. I don't think any of it would have happened if I hadn't showed up and if it wasn't meant to happen, right? So I'm not like taking credit away from myself, but I got introduced to Jamie, the producer, and she said to me right off the bat, she's like, "Okay, basically you have 2 minutes." She's like, "In 2 minutes, I will know whether you have a talk or not." No pressure, right? So she's like, "So jump into it." So I did, and she's like, "Yeah, you have a talk." I was kind of surprised, right? I was just like, "Really? I'm going to be on a TEDx stage?" So then the prep was, um, you basically have like I had like 8 minutes. They said 6 to 8 minutes. You've got to have they call it your through line, right? It's kind of like where you start is where you kind of come back to at the end, and you tell the journey in the middle. So I've always liked writing. So I wrote and rewrote and rewrote, but I wasn't quite there yet when I finally heard from them 2 months later, and they're like, "Okay, we need it by tomorrow."
Oh,
So
wow.
it was like, no, I'm not ready, right? So of course, I was kind of stressing out, imposter syndrome and all of that. But ultimately, she's like, "We need it by 10 p.m. tonight." So I got on. There was an app I had to record on and send it to them, and I was just like, "All right, you guys, I'm just going to speak from my heart. I know the gist of it, but here it is." And I was like, "Oh no, they're going to say we made a mistake. She doesn't have a talk." But they loved it. They loved what I kind of had come up with. So then I really started working on it and memorizing it, and yeah, and then it was an amazing experience. Just the way that there were 8 of us, and just the way that they made us feel, like, they just were so welcoming. It was TEDx Cincinnati. I just can't say enough about the producers and the film crew. We were in a studio, and it was amazing. And I just feel super like honored and blessed that the universe, and I connected on that opportunity. So
Mm, I love that. The TEDx talk that I'm giving is about how the universe rewards bold action. And I share a similar story to you in that I was at Stacy's TEDx last August. She
mhm.
nominated me. That's how I got my foot in the door. And for people who don't know who Stacy Lauren is, how would you describe Stacy in 1 to 2 sentences?
I would say Stacy's like a fairy godmother, a fairy goddess mother. I swear.
That's so good and accurate.
She is just, she has her own magic, and she's just a master of connecting people. I've never met anyone like her. She just, yeah, I would say fairy goddess mother.
I love that description. The way I describe Stacy to people is that she is one of two people that I've met who her gap between her saying she's going to do something and her actually doing it is microscopic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most people say, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to give a TEDx talk. I want to give a TEDx talk, or I want to write a book, or I want to build a community. And then you check in with them in 2 months, 3 months, and they're like, oh yeah, like I'm about to get started. And all these things are getting in the way. And Stacy, you check in 2 months and she's like already done the thing and she's on to the next thing and there's people doing it with her. And I think it's such a testament to her fairy godmother like nature that the people who are in her sphere are now giving TEDx talks. You gave a TEDx talk. I'm going to do mine in March.
Yeah.
There's way too many people, it seems like, who this should have worked out for. But that's
Mm-hmm.
the power of her idea. And like her whole TEDx talk that we'll link in the show notes is about find your people. My
Mm-hmm.
people are the people who share similar goals, who are on the same journey as you, because you need them for support and encouragement and morale. But also having that shared goal really connects you and brings you together in a way that's unique and so much more helpful than your friends and family being like, I don't know if you can do it.
Exactly. Yeah. They're like, what? That idea, that's really out there. I don't know about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
She, she just increases your belief in yourself so
Yes.
much, because I just felt really seen, when I did Find Your Voice last January. I think there was just a handful of us that went on to the next thing, the next class, the audience accelerator, which she's calling it something different now, the wealth experiment. But I think there was 12 of us maybe in there. I don't think you were in
I wasn't.
that phase. Yeah. And we were basically watching her build it. And so she was so real because, she went through so many iterations, and there was frustration and there was doubt, but she let us see all of that. And that really validates that, if you're feeling that way too, it's like that's normal. Those are like the growing pains to get where you're wanting to get to.
Yes, yes. I want to talk about the identity piece and your identity and how it might have shifted before giving a TEDx and after. But before we do, tell the audience, tell everyone listening a little bit more about the hidden gifts of grief and the hidden gifts of loss and more about the topic and all the things.
Okay. So when my mom was dying, it was January of 2020 when I found out that she had pancreatic cancer. So I live in Ohio. I flew out to LA. I was going to stay for 10 days and just we were going to do some fun things before she died, before she got really, really sick. Because she just had a stomach ache for 2 years, which I like to point out that went undetected. And pancreatic cancer usually does until you have pain. But by the time you have pain, it's too late. So I don't know if there's like pre-screenings for it or something, but it's crazy. So when we found out, she had like 3 months to live. Right now, I'd never been around death ever, and all of a sudden, basically, I was in charge of the whole thing, and it was a trip because then lockdown happened too. So here we are in the middle of the pandemic and we don't have any support. Her friends can't come over. The hospice is mostly just phone calls. And then, when I was with her for the whole thing, obviously I couldn't go home. So I stayed for 10 weeks instead of 10 days. And then afterwards, like I'd never really been in deep, deep grief like that before. And grief is weird. It basically comes in waves, and it's unpredictable. It just hits you out of nowhere. It makes it really hard to function. And the thing that helped me the most was talking about it, honestly. I kind of was like, I think everybody's getting sick of me because all I talk about is death, you know. But I had an end of life doula, and I talk about this in my talk. I had this end of life doula, and she listened to me every week for an hour. And I just shared. Sometimes we even go over. And she made me feel seen, very much like how Stacy did, because she just validated everything. And I started thinking, you know what? I know there's a lot of people who are going through the same thing. And I just want to talk to all of them. So I should start a podcast, right? But before I met Stacy, it was like, how do I start a podcast? Who am I to start a podcast, right? Who is even going to listen? So I had all those doubts. But along the way, I started to recognize what I called the hidden gifts. And some of the hidden gifts were there was a lot of forgiveness. So, growing up in my family, like every family, there's trauma, there's good, there's bad, the trauma all kind of came from my dad, and I had to be in that house with him, and he wasn't helpful at all in this whole process, right? So, but out of all of this came this forgiveness. My mom was very OCD, and she absolutely drove me nuts. But because she was dying, and she did this thing, um, she did this thing one night where she was standing in front of the stove after she brushed her teeth. She always brushed her teeth in the kitchen, which was also very weird. And she started touching all the burners. And she had this very methodical way that she was doing it. And I'm just looking at her like, what is going on? And then when she told me, well, I know I'm OCD, but this is how I kept the house from burning down all these years. That's when it really hit me like, oh my God, the OCD is because she actually thinks she's protecting everybody. So I just like my heart just opened up, and I had all this compassion really for both of them on this level that I never had before. And after she passed, it was this just like this forgiveness. And I was just so at peace with, all the resentments and everything that I had had. And I was like, wow, that's a gift. I was like, I'm really resilient. I did this thing that I felt completely unqualified to do, and there was that, and then people started showing up, like the right people right when I needed them, like the end of life doula. And I started just saying there's so many blessings that have come out of this, and the more I focused on the blessings, the more I saw the blessings, and the more I felt like I was being blessed, and that's kind of where the hidden gifts came from. And sometimes they're just little things, like just seeing something that reminds me of my mom, like numbers. A lot of times it's numbers for me. Like I'll see 304. That's my mom's address. And when I see those things, I can't prove it, but I have this feeling that, oh my gosh, there she is. She's saying hello. And about when it comes to grief, I started thinking, grief is water. Water has to move because emotion is water, and it has to move through you. And if you can let it move through you, and I think a lot of us, we don't want to feel it. It doesn't feel good, and people push it down. But if you let it move through you, it's like it has this cleansing effect. And eventually it does move through you, and then you don't feel it so much. In fact, I just came up with an acronym for grief, which is grief releases if emotions flow.
Whoa, I love that.
I know. I thought that was pretty good. So I can say I'm not in grief anymore. I feel so blessed, and I feel like, through giving this talk and starting this community, I've been able to help other people, and that's such a huge blessing. I feel like when you can help other people, that's what it's about.
That is what it's about. That's what we're here for. And Julie, it is so inspiring and just beautiful that you took this really hard experience that you weren't prepared for, you were thrust into, and you're able to take this topic that people don't like to talk about, death. They aren't comfortable with it.
Mm-mm.
And you were able to use it to open your podcast, to create this community. And you've really turned this objectively bad thing from the outside looking in into a gift and an opportunity. And it's so interesting because you hear about this across so many different people's stories. The thing that is one of the worst things that ever happened to them is this springboard, this flourishing opening moment to the next chapter, to kind of what you're really here to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Like purpose. It really gave me purpose. There's a singer that I really like. Her name's Lizzie Jeff. And one of the lines in her song, she says, "Did you know that your wound is the gateway to heaven on earth?"
Wow.
And that always has just really struck me. It might take you years to work through it and come to that reality. But yeah, just like what you said, I think it's true. I think that thing that breaks you open, you know, just allows you to grow so much. And you need support to do that too, you know. You can't do it in a vacuum.
Absolutely. And that makes me want to ask, and maybe this was the doula you were talking about, but Rhonda, the British hospice nurse, is that the same person or is this someone else?
No, Rhonda the nurse. Oh gosh, because I know you read my my excerpt from my memoir. Yeah, Rhonda was our hospice nurse, and she was just a ray of sunshine. And it was unfortunate that we didn't get to see her more because of lockdown. But mostly what we got were phone calls, and she would say, "Hello, it's Rhonda the nurse." It's just she was amazing. And one of the things about my mom was I call her an organized hoarder. This woman's garage was floor to rafters with bins. Many of them were color coded by holiday. She could not pass up a clearance sale, and there were at least 100, maybe 150 bins that were just Christmas decorations, Christmas gifts, Christmas regifts that were all labeled by the person who gave them to her so that she didn't regift them to the same person. She had a list of all the gifts she gave people. There were like 75 people on these lists. And I asked her one time, I was just like, "What is it about Christmas, Mom?" She's like, "I like to give." I'm like, "Oh my God." And she does. So anyway, my dad, when my mom, after she died, he's like, "I just want to get a junk truck and we're just going to throw all this stuff away." But I could not let that happen because I knew how important all these things were to her. But no one was taking donations because it was COVID. I was like, "What are we going to do?" So Rhonda the nurse and her husband came and took 2 truckloads of all the Christmas. And she said that she apparently was as much of a Christmas fanatic as my mother. And she's like, "I'm going to put your mom's stuff out. I'm not doing the accent now, but she said, it's going to be loved and cherished." And that was another one of the hidden gifts. I found a home for the ridiculous amount of Christmas things.
So it sounds like some of the hidden gifts were understanding your mom more than you had in the past and what she was going through with the OCD. And then it also sounds like another hidden gift was the people who came into your life during this time of need.
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. And I have a little story about my daughter. So every year, my mom would send a box, and over the years, at my request, the boxes got smaller and smaller. The Christmas boxes. I'm not. I try not to collect as many things as my mom, and so sometimes when I would get these huge boxes, it was just overwhelming. I was just like, "Mom, I don't want that much stuff." So she'd gotten better and she'd made the boxes smaller. But the first Christmas without her, realizing that box wasn't coming, you know, it was pretty devastating. And I even felt guilt for all the times I kind of didn't want the box. And I was just like, I don't want to do Christmas this year. I think that's pretty normal. And we lived on opposite coasts, so I didn't get to see her every Christmas, but I got the box. And the box always had, like, there were certain things you could count on. There was holiday themed hand towels always. There would be whatever the Starbucks holiday blend was that year. There'd be C's candy. They were all predictable, and she would put these little notes on them, like that were just very silly, as if these things needed an explanation. It would be like a bag of chip clips, and it would say "always useful." So I mean, they were cute, quirky things that she did. So anyway, that year, my daughter came home. She said, "Mom, I don't want you to look at anything that comes in the mail." I'm like, "All right." She's planning something so cute, right? And my daughter you had to wake her up for Christmas, even as a little kid. Most little kids are up. We were up at 5. You had to wake her up. Maybe by 11 she'd get up. But on this particular year, she was up so early. She did a TikTok about, what do you do when you're up at 4 and your family members aren't awake yet for Christmas. So she wanted me to open my box first. She was adamant. She was so excited. So I start to open this box, and I open it, and it's a USPS priority mail box. And I look at it, and she's written in cursive my address, my mom's return address. And when I open it, my daughter had recreated the box with all the same little things and all the silly little notes. And I mean, that was like one of the most thoughtful things that anybody's ever done for me. So she brought grandma to Christmas. And that was like a huge hidden gift.
That is so beautiful. How thoughtful of her.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many things I want to ask and talk about, but coming back to Rhonda, the British hospice nurse, for a moment, she reminded me when I was reading that in the excerpt of your memoir, she reminded me of Bronnie Ware. And maybe it's because they both have accents. Do you know who Bronnie Ware is?
I don't.
So she was, I don't know if she's still doing it, but she's still alive, a palliative care nurse. She's Australian, and that's why she has a great accent. And she sat with over 500 of her patients in their final days and just talked to them and heard their life story. And then what emerged from those end of life moments was her patients talking about regret. And she wrote a best selling, very famous book now called The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. And you
I know
may have
that
heard
book.
about
I
that.
haven't read it, but I know that book. Yeah.
So that book, and really just the regrets piece, has played a huge role in my life because it was actually learning that the number one regret people have at the end of their life is, I wish I would have had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expect of me. That changed my life completely. It helps me quit my job in finance and follow my heart and my dreams and start focusing more on people and helping people and making a difference. And that's a question I wanted to ask because I know your dad was there at the end and he was unhelpful, but he's included in this question. Did either of your parents, and more specifically your mom, did she share anything in those final weeks about regrets, unfulfilled dreams, or anything of the sort?
Hmm. That's a really good question. You know, I don't I don't think she did. My mom was more somebody who had a lot of guilt over things that I don't think were things you should have guilt over. And she was always like that. I always felt like, so I think I got that message by seeing my mom always kind of settle for things, you know? She always settled, and I was frustrated because it was like, I want you to have more. I want you to feel like you deserve more, you know? And my daughter was there with me helping me take care of her too, and we were on a mission to help her see that she deserved. And so we just waited on her hand and foot. And she would apologize. I'm so sorry to ask you guys this, to bother you, but could I have some ginger ale? You know? And it's just heartbreaking
Mm,
to hear her, you know, even coming from that place, even as she was dying. So I feel like maybe I don't think she shared any regrets. She had more fear because my mom was very religious. She had fear that she might not get into heaven, you
mm,
know, things like that, that I don't actually literally believe in that, but she did. So she wanted this minister to come and do the last forgiveness or whatever. And when that happened, it was so, to me, it just felt so not authentic. I was like angry. I'm like, why did she need this? Why are you here making her feel even worse about things that, I don't know. Yeah. So you know what? I don't really feel like she did. And it was, my father died a year later, and it was the same kind of with him. I felt like they both kind of lived an unfulfilled life. You know, my dad was really, really, really smart, and he was obsessed with things that I can't relate to at all, like World War II and football. And but he was so smart that he would have been a great like history professor. He was a postal worker, and he hated his job, and he was super unfulfilled. And all he did when he wasn't working basically was like watch TV. I mean, they did travel together. They went on a lot of train trips. They were really obsessed with trains. Yeah, so no, I don't really think that they did. I watched them and thought, wow, I wish they could have, from my perspective, had a more fulfilled life, but maybe they felt okay about what they had. I mean, I will give them this. They moved from Ohio, from a tiny town in Ohio, to Los Angeles in 1960, and they were just children, you know? And they bought a little house and they kind of made it in Los Angeles, which now I think is kind of almost impossible to do. You don't have a lot of money, but anyway, that was a long answer, and I don't know. Yeah.
No, it was a great answer because it makes me want to ask you if it's changed anything for you in terms of mindset or what you want to do with your life, seeing your parents settle, or at least what looked like to you that they were settling for things that didn't fully excite them, that maybe they weren't as fulfilled as they could be. And so
Yeah.
maybe this ties in perfectly to that identity shift question that we were going to come back to. What does your life look like now that you are a TEDx speaker, that you're a podcast host, that you have this community.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I also used to have a corporate job that I hated, and because of the deaths of my parents and what they kind of left for me and what they left for me and my brother, I was able to leave that horrible job. And I felt like it was crushing my soul. Like I couldn't breathe when I walked into the building, right? So the way my parents were has influenced me from like a really young age. I was this little rebel, you know. I was just like, "Oh, you don't want me to do this? I'm going to do it," you know. I was the first person in my family to go to college and graduate from college. I went to UCLA with a psych major. I just always wanted, I've always kind of had that little voice that's like, oh, you can't do that, but like do it anyway, you know? So it was, yeah, now I do feel like I'm doing all these dreams that I had. Like I feel like I'm 60 and I feel like I'm stepping into my power, you know, finally, you know. So, yeah, I think they had a huge, huge influence on me in that way. Maybe not exactly, maybe it was kind of in the opposite way of what they meant, you know. But yeah, yeah, I feel like, and this, it's been this year, I feel like I went to grad school in the, in the Stacy verse, right?
Yes.
I do. Yeah. I
And it's
feel,
been
you know what, it took me a long time for me to catch up with the way that other people were seeing me. Other people saw me as this, as more than I could see myself as. But now it's catching up and it's like, wow, yeah, I really did do those things. You know, all I wanted was when I found Find Your Voice, I just wanted to write this book. But I've now done this TEDx and started this community, and like I feel like I've done so much more than that even, you know, that I feel very fulfilled even though I haven't actually, you know, written the book yet. So I probably will, but it's not like pressing on me to do it. You know, I love being spontaneous and I love being in the moment, and I love not having these expectations really. I'm not saying I don't like having goals, but I like just to see how things unfold. And I've met so many people like you. I met you at Stacy's house at her mastermind. Like I've just met all these amazing people. And the fact I've had all these people come on my podcast and tell me their stories. And actually one of the ideas that I want to do is I have this idea for I'm calling it the grief monologues. And remember years ago there was this it was called the Vagina Monologues and it was a book, but then they made it into a like a stage production. I want to do that with all these stories of people who have transformed through grief. Like every single one of them who's been on my podcast has shared a story that's just been mind blowing to me. And wouldn't that be cool if I
that would
could
be
do
so
that?
cool and so powerful. That would anytime, and maybe it's because I'm fascinated by death, and I think that it's something that so many people are uncomfortable with, and we should really get closer to it. But I know that that would be really powerful because anytime death is part of a story, it just draws people in.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah, I am also fascinated by death. I never was before, but now I am. I'm just so fascinated by it on so many levels. You know, like what is it when the soul, like what is the soul, right? And when the soul leaves the body, and the body is definitely empty now, you're looking at it up close and personal, and it's like, whoa, it gets cold really fast and stiff. So it's like, what is that? What is that unseen essence that makes us alive? You know, I don't know if anybody really knows, but it is a fascinating thing to ponder.
100%. And you are now in this place that you hadn't predicted. And I love the spontaneity piece that you're talking about. When you are tapped into your passion, to this thing, when you're in alignment with yourself, that's really when what I call the magic happens. You meet people, doors open, you end up with in these beautiful scenarios that were unforecastable, unpredictable. And I want to ask this question in two ways. One is, what would you say to someone who's listening to this who is before they've tapped into that, before they've gone on their hero's journey and they're wanting to dare to dream, but for whatever reason, maybe they're still in that corporate job that is suffocating them, that when they walk in the building, they feel like they can't breathe. So I want you to share a little bit to them of like what it's like being on the other side of it. And I feel like part of this too is you speaking to your younger self who was maybe settling there a bit and wanting more and not really knowing what was going to happen next. What advice or lessons or encouragement would you give to someone like that?
Wow, that's a big question. Off the top of my head, do find your voice. It's, you know, um, wow.
And
I
I'll
would say like don't give up on your dreams though, because what you're searching for is also searching for you. You know that dream is in your heart for a reason. You know, it's not an accident that you're here. You have something that the world needs, and it's sometimes very hard to believe that when you're, you know, when you're struggling. But yeah, I would say don't. And there is so much help and support out there, you know, especially now with the internet and just the way we can all meet, you know, on Zoom. And I think it's hard to reach out for help if you're depressed. I mean, I definitely went through many, many years of depression, and it is really hard to reach out for help. But there is help, I would say. You know, just start small. I've had this thought recently. Being part of the Do the Thing community, there are so many things that you can do. There's so much brilliance here, and there's so many offers, you know. But I don't know. I don't. It's this is not true for Stacy because, like you said, she's just like do the next thing and the next thing. But I can get overwhelmed, and I've been thinking about this lately. And I'm sure this is a thing. I'm sure there's books. I'm sure someone's done a TEDx. But like the word that I keep hearing is micro goals, and I think when you're grieving and when you're struggling, a micro goal might be take a shower, right? That day, you know, like do one thing, find one good thing that day that you could be thankful for. Um, do one little thing, if that's all you can do, that you makes you feel better. Because then you can say, okay, yesterday I did that. Maybe today I could also go to the grocery store. You know, I mean, if you're really that low, you might want to start with those tiny micro goals, you know? Um, there's a lot of gratitude challenges out there. There's a book that I just read and it was called The Gratitude Jar. Every day for 30 days, you write down one thing that you're grateful for and why. I feel like gratitude is one of the most powerful mind shifts that you can have. Because my mom used to say this all the time, you know, it can always be worse. It's not necessarily the way to think about it, but but it is really. You know, if you're feeling bad about whatever, you can, you know, I'm like a sucker for documentaries where people have gone through hell and then they come out on the other side because it's like, oh my gosh, if they could survive that, then what am I complaining about, right? You know? So it's like look for the hidden gifts, look for the blessings. Just start where you are with a micro goal, you know?
That's so good. I have that same. It sounds like those type of documentaries are. I don't know if guilty pleasure is the right word, but it's something that really brings you in and fascinates you. And
Yeah.
I have that same thing with speaking of death, books about people who die midlife when they're just coming into their prime. Two that come to mind: When Breath Becomes Air, one of the most heartbreaking, best written books I've ever read. Sounds like you like it as well.
I like that book too. Yeah. I
Yeah,
have that. Yeah. Ugh. I know. He was just oh, that guy had everything going for him. And it's just like not fair, you know? I mean, saying it's not fair doesn't solve anything, but it's like, yeah. And
right.
what's the other book you were going to mention?
So that one, When Breath Becomes Air, and then another one is called Not Fade Away, and it's
Mm.
same midlife. Everything's going great. I think he just sold his company, and the world is his oyster. And then he dies of stomach cancer like a year later. And it's these books that I think the reason why they draw me in so much is it just makes you so present and so grateful for everything that's going on in your life. And whenever I read these books, it's like a reset, just flushes through me, and all the little problems I have don't matter anymore when I compare it to this big thing. And it just makes me radically grateful for my life again and everything in it. So I think that can be a really useful tool. Any book about death. Tuesdays with Maury is another great one that I read recently.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great reset. I, there, there's a family that lives right around the corner from me, and her I think he was her no, he was her youngest, or her middle son, I guess. He was in my daughter's grade. So I knew of him. We didn't know him, but we knew of him, and they live right around the corner. The night before his graduation party, he was hit by a drunk driver, and they had to make the decision, like 5 days later. He wasn't going to be able to come back from it. And I mean, I drive by their house every time I leave my house. And so for the last, well, it was 2014. That has always, just made me so grateful, you know, that I have my daughter. I mean, yeah, those things, they just reframe it. And yeah, it's just kind of mind blowing.
That's it. Reframe. I love that you said that. That's really what it does. It just puts everything in perspective and reminds you that,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, you have legs, you can walk, you can breathe, you can move. Like, how
Yeah.
good is life?
Yeah.
And gratitude is such a powerful emotion. Two of my favorite things that I've learned about it, one is that apparently it's impossible to feel gratitude and another emotion. You can just feel gratitude. Like, you can't feel grateful and scared, or grateful and be worrying about something else at the same time. Gratitude is this all encompassing emotion that kind of pushes everything out. So if you are feeling that gratitude, man, it feels so good. And then
Mm-hmm.
the second piece, kind of talking about the gratitude jar and why gratitude lists are so helpful and effective, is that there's part of your brain called the reticular activating system. It's essentially the brain's filter. Like, all these things are coming in at us all the time, and the brain needs to filter things out. Otherwise, you'd go crazy. And when you start practicing gratitude and you know that, okay, I'm going to have to write something I'm grateful for tomorrow, or tonight I'm going to write three things, your brain starts to let in more of these opportunities that you can be grateful for, because it kind of knows, okay, we need to let this in more. Stop filtering out all the good things, because we're going to need to recall it and write about it. So those two things together have always made me really fascinated by gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. And it draws more of those things to you. And those are the hidden gifts. That's just like that. You could call it gratitude, you could call it the hidden gifts, but the more you focus on that, the more you draw that to you, and it really has the power to lift you up.
So going back to the other G word, we've been talking about grief, and
Yeah.
we're gonna test my brain here. You came up with the acronym that is grief, and what does the G stand for? I had it a moment
It
ago.
stands for grief, actually. It's grief
Grief
releases
releases
if
if
emotions
emotions
flow.
flow. That's what it is. Okay, great. Oh, I almost had it. So what? This is a question I want to ask. What do most people get wrong about grief?
Hmm. I think it's that they avoid it. They feel like, you know what, I just have to get over this. I have to move on. I don't want to think about it. They push it down. But I believe it has to move. You have to release it. It's really uncomfortable and it feels awful, and nobody wants to feel that. It can be very disruptive. And I mean, I get it. If you know, you got you have other kids, you have your job, you have all these things, but I feel like you have to carve out time. You have to feel that, because otherwise it's going to get stuck in your body. It's going to cause disease and depression, and that saying, run toward the barking dog. um, I felt personally that I didn't have a choice. Grief just kept showing up, and i wanted i wanted to I wanted to like move through it. So I had these strategies. One of my strategies was my playlist, my farewell playlist. And I made this playlist while I was taking care of my mom. And it started this one night. I mean, I have a lot of Spotify playlists, but it started this one night when I was, so in my family, if you cried, you would get something to cry about. It was that kind of a situation. So we learned not to do that. Don't show anger, don't show emotion, just be stoic. And yeah. So in my family, when we were all there with my mom, nobody was crying. It was like we were kind of going through the motions. We all knew what was happening, but. So I was laying in my childhood bedroom in an 800 square foot house where you can hear everything. And I still had that feeling of, well, don't make any sound if you're crying, right? But this song came on my Spotify. You know how Spotify will just throw songs in there like, oh, we think you'll like this too. So it was called Farewell, and it's just a piano piece, and it's by Echo River. I'd never heard of them. I'd never heard the song. That song, it broke me open. And up until that point, one of the things I was so afraid of, there was two things I was afraid of. What's going to happen when she dies? Like, what's that moment going to be like, and how am I going to show up? What am I going to do? And the other one was, I don't want to feel that grief. I don't want to feel that at all. That's going to be awful. But the hidden gift of that moment is when I felt that, and I was literally sobbing for like an hour, was I all of a sudden I knew, okay, this is what it's going to feel like. This is what this feels like, but I'm going to be able to get through it. So it was like grief kind of came and visited me. So having had that experience, then I knew that I had to just go with it. I would go sit outside in my hot tub at night and sob out there so nobody would hear me. And I would listen. So I kept building the playlist and building it and building it. And I would just listen to the playlist and it would just make me cry. But because I did that for like a solid year, I feel like I moved through it like so much. I mean, I can't say so much faster because I mean, who knows? Everybody's pace is different. And it's complicated too because you have complicated feelings sometimes about the person who died. Like when my dad died, I didn't have the same feelings I had when my mom died. So it was a totally different process, of grief. So it was like a solid year of grief, and then bam, oh, your dad's gonna die too, and then there was all the things to do. There was cleaning out the house, and blah blah blah. But yeah, that's what I would say about grief. If you need you got to let it move through you. That's my advice. Don't avoid it. Run toward the barking dog and get the support you need, whatever that might be.
And it sounds like that's a perfect real life example of grief releases if emotions flow. If you let those emotions come and move through you,
Yeah,
that's how you kind of ride that wave, which you
yeah.
described earlier comes in waves. It's not like you're the same level of sad all the time. It's
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interspersed. Yeah, you'll have these moments where all of a sudden you're not thinking about it, and then you'll be like, oh, I didn't think about that for the last couple of hours, right? And then it's like, oh, I didn't think about that today. Or, now I can think about my mom and I can talk about my mom, but I don't it's rare that I will have all those emotions come up because they went through me and they moved. And so I can talk about it. And I think that's one of the reasons I can talk about it. And I love talking about it. And I love hearing people's stories about it because we need to like not be so afraid of it. It's unavoidable. We're all going to die. We're all going to know somebody who dies. We're all going to go through loss and grief. And there's that fear and that stigma just makes it harder. I want to make it easier to the extent that you can make it easier.
yeah, we will definitely all know someone who dies. And to take that even a step further, everyone you've ever met, know, and love will die, including yourself. And it's so crazy that we go through the motions pretending like that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's the most, like, birth and death are the most natural human things that we can possibly do. It's like the first act and the
Mhm.
final act. And yet we run around with our hands over our eyes,
Yeah.
avoiding it.
One of the end of life doulas that I follow, she's not the one that I personally had, but her name is Suzanne O'Brien, and she's trained 350,000 people to be end of life doulas. And she wrote a book that hasn't come out yet, but it's called The Good Death. And in it, she educates everybody about all the things that you can do, excuse me, to make it not so bad. And like one of those things is to have the conversations now, before the person is dying. We just did our will and whatever yesterday. And put in those things like, yeah, don't keep me alive if I'm in a coma. Don't like, this is who I want all my stuff to go to. Like, do all those things. Like my parents they pre-planned um, their funeral and cremation and all that We didn't get to have a funeral because it was COVID, but they made that so easy for me. Whereas, for example, my daughter's boyfriend's mom died last year, and it was a different. They're in a different like economic situation, so she didn't have any of those kind of things. So then, on top of the death, all of the burden of figuring out what to do and how to pay for it was on them, and
Mm,
that's just not. I mean, to the extent that you have control over those things in advance, I would highly suggest that you do that and you have those conversations to make it easier for everybody.
definitely. So I think where I want to take us here near the end of the episode is bringing it back to Find Your Voice, which Find Your Voice is this 17-day challenge that Stacey Lauren, who we've been talking so highly of, she created this and she is hosting it. And I'm actually going to put a link to it in the description for this episode. So if you're listening to this and you want to find your voice, and I'm going to ask you, Julie, what it created for you in your life, that will be an option for people. So, what did it create and make possible? Because I have had the unique perspective of seeing people go through Stacey's Find Your Voice challenge, but never doing it myself. And I've been periodically in and out of Stacey's world, and it's wild to see a group of people, men and women, who are coming into Stacey's world and they don't really know the tech side of things. They haven't spoken or have a podcast, or they're still trying to figure out what they want to do. And then I come back in a couple months and they have podcasts, they're coaches, they have programs, they're speaking on stages, and they're so alive. They have really found their voice and their unique spark. And so tell us a little bit about what this program is and what it created for you.
Yeah. So, um, I remember Stacy just kind of came on my Facebook feed. I'm like, oh, immediately I'm like, oh yes, I have to connect with this woman. She's got a spark. And so Find Your Voice, it really taps into your what's on your heart. And the challenges, their dares they're just they're little micro dares. I dare you. And the dare that really broke me out of whatever. I mean, I was doing all the dares, but the dare was, if you were going to write a book, what would it be about? And I was like, well, I am trying to write a book. And I started talking, and I would usually, when I would talk, what you do in Find Your Voice is you go on Facebook and you answer the dares. You Depending on your comfort circle, and Stacy talks a lot about the comfort circles. You could type out your answer, or you could record it, or you could post a video, or you could go live. And when I got that, usually I would do like 2 minutes, or I would just type it out. But when I got that dare, it was midnight. I was in bed. I'm like, no, I've got to do my dare. I've got to do it. So I start talking, and I end up talking for like 12 or 15 minutes. And of course, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have taken up that much time. But I talked about the book, and instead of theoretically talking about the book, well, I would write a book that was like blah 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 story. I just started telling the story, and and then Stacy commented on my post in a way that made me feel so seen. And she said, oh my God, please start a podcast, which was like, nobody had said that to me before. And so the encouragement that I found is what gave me the confidence to start the podcast that I had wanted to start for 2 years. Um, and then I just knew that no matter what Stacy did next, I had to stay in her orbit. So that's what I did. I didn't want the dares to stop. I wanted to keep doing the dares, because every time you do one, it unlocks something else in you, and helps you bring that out. And it's unlike anything that I've ever done. And I'm so glad that she's really expanding it and taking it into corporations and things like that. And I've done it. I'm going to do it again. I want to say it's my fourth time. I'm not sure. And I had people in my community do it last time, and it was so cool, because it was like I went from being at the very beginning of finding my voice to having the opportunity to support other people while they found their voice.
It's so beautiful how someone acknowledging, someone seeing your dream and seeing your voice as you step into it for the first time can have such a life-changing impact. And
Yeah.
that's what Stacey does best. She is such a believer in people, and she will believe in you way more than you'll believe in yourself. And it's so helpful. And I'm going to take my community through it, the Find Your Voice Challenge. So I'm so excited for it. And what I love about it is that it's unbelievably affordable. I think it's $47. So like
47.
there's literally no reason
It's like a
why
no-brainer.
you
Yeah.
can't do this. If you are listening to this, whether you have dared to dream and you're living the dream life and super successful in that, or you're kind of at the beginning of your journey and you're trying to find your voice and free your voice and really step into that
Mhm.
passion, and what Vinny and I, my co-host, we talk about all the time, like find what lights your soul on fire. So I'm definitely going to
I
include
love
that in the show notes here so people can sign up for that. But
that.
Julie, thank you
Great.
so much for
You're
coming on. I
welcome.
know that your book is going to be amazing because I read that short little excerpt you sent me, and you're such a phenomenal writer.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That, more validation, more feeling seen to spur me on to continue the mission. Yeah, it's been really fun hanging out and getting to know you better. Thank you for
Yes.
having me on.
And the world needs your mission. The world needs what you are creating. So please keep going. The last question I'll ask you before we wrap up is, where can people go to listen to your podcast, to join your community, to learn more about all the good things you're doing?
Thank you. So I have a community on Facebook. It's called the Hidden Gifts of Loss, and you can join. You have to answer a couple questions. You can watch my TEDx if you just put in Julie Trainer TEDx Cincinnati. It comes up right away on YouTube. And my podcast is also called Hidden Gifts of Loss, and I'm on Spotify and Apple and all the places that you find podcasts. And I'm always looking for guests that want to talk about how they found their own hidden gifts of loss and how they transformed.
Amazing. So it sounds like if you're listening to this and you have a story to share, to tell about loss, connect with Julie, and connect with Julie regardless to see all the amazing things that she's doing. So thank you so much, Julie, for being here. Really appreciate
Thank
you.
you. Yeah.
And thank you to everyone in tuning in with us today. As always, we love you guys. So grateful for everyone who's supporting the Dare to Dream podcast. Take care, and we'll see you next time. If you liked this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Dare to Dream podcast on YouTube. We want to make sure you don't miss out on any of the amazing episodes we're going to be coming out with in the future. And if you liked this video specifically, please give it a like, leave a comment, let us know what you loved. Thank you so much for being here. We love you guys.